Yeah, they even tell you in the book to intentionally think about your death and what that could look
Yes.
like. I think every day or a couple times a day.
Well, yeah, and it's a hard. Who wants to do that?
Welcome to Legacy Conversations, recorded right here at the barn on Collimer Road. I'm your host, Mark Modulewski. Our mission, to educate, inspire, and entertain. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get started.
Jonathan, welcome to Legacy Conversations. How you doing, buddy?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming up here.
Absolutely. Wouldn't miss it.
Like last minute. Like last week we talked about it, and today you're here.
Mark, I would never miss an opportunity to come visit you, buddy.
Never.
Never.
So you flew up from sunny Tampa Bay to come up with me to do a little business stuff, right? Some business things.
Little business. Always a little business, little play.
Little business, little play. Yeah. So you know a little bit about what we're doing, right? You know me from my work life, from my work balance, from being a financial planner. You happen to work for the company that I chose 3.5 years ago to join, right? JW Cole. Tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you do? How'd you get there?
Yeah, so I run our practice management team now, and essentially we are tasked with the fun job of helping advisors grow their business. What I love most about the job is every day is totally different. And the reason for that is because we have such an independent model that if you interview 100 advisors, you're gonna run into 100 different businesses. So that keeps things nice and fresh for us. On the team, we have about 5 people, so we all are somewhat generous, but also sort of wear different hats as well and specialize in different areas. So my focus tends to be profitability, financial planning. I'm a CFP myself. Used to sit on the same side of the table that you all do, so I can kind of see it through that lens.
Isn't that what all home office people say? I used to be where you are.
I used to be where you are. Yeah. Now I get to help coach all you.
Yeah. Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
And when did you get into the business?
I got into the business. I was just talking to someone the other day about this, about 12 years ago now.
12 years ago.
It goes by quick.
Yeah, super quick. So you're in Tampa now because that's where the JDB Co. home office is.
Yes.
But you didn't grow up there.
I didn't grow up in Tampa, so where I grew up was a lot colder than Tampa. Actually, not too far from here, the North Shore of Massachusetts, in a city called Peabody, so about 25 minutes north of Boston. So falls and winters looked a lot like it does around Syracuse, and made my way to Tampa about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's been great ever since.
Yeah, and you and I have talked. We have this kind of connection because I went to college in the North Shore of Boston. My kids went to college in the North Shore of Boston. I met my wife on the North Shore of Boston, so
it's near and dear to your heart.
It's near and dear to my heart, man. That's why we get along.
Yeah, there's a few things I miss. I miss the roast beefs. We had a great lunch earlier at a cool Italian sub shop, so I miss those. Wouldn't trade the weather for Tampa, but it's always fun getting back here for the fall and throwing on a hoodie and kind of taking in all the foliage.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no doubt about it. No. So you started your career 12 years ago. You're a transplant, like a Boston-ish kid. Now you're down in Florida. Moved down there 4 years ago, 5 years ago. You're working for this new company. You got this big role, or a role in there, right? We're primarily responsible for helping folks like me, like financial advisors around the country. What's the, like, why did you choose the company you chose? Like, I would imagine a guy like you, relatively, I'm going to say well-dressed, reasonably smart. Like, why did you go from where you were to here? Like, what made you stop there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I spent the bulk of my career at a very, very large corporation. It was great.
No one would ever know their names. Right?
No one would ever know the name Fidelity. I'm sure you've
never.
No, small, tiny company based in Boston. Really great company, amazing training program. They do a fantastic job of, I think, hiring talent there. I worked with a lot of really, really talented people. It was a great way to cut my teeth in the industry, and that was my first crack at really dealing with and handling retail clients.
Sure.
What's really cool is they kind of thrust you right away into working with high net worth clients.
Yeah.
The downside is it's a large organization, right?
Sure.
And just like anywhere, you can sort of feel like, you know, you kind of get lost in the shuffle a little bit. And what JW Cole brings to the table, we'll call it like a small to mid-sized broker dealer. I mean, the number one thing is the culture, and it's the first place I've worked where you walk into work every day and you're like, I matter and my work matters. So for me, you know, money, of course, is a consideration, but I think as you mature in your career, impact is just as equally important in that. So being able to work with advisors like you and being out in the field and actually seeing the work that you do have impact on your life and your business, that's what's rewarding to me, and that's why I picked JW Cole.
Yeah. I think how your work and how what you do makes you feel and makes other people feel is super important.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I don't know if it's transcendent, but at one point you go to work because you need a paycheck. And then at some point you hope that you make this transition that says, I go to work because I want to make a difference.
Yeah.
Now I still need to pay my rent,
Sure.
right? And I still need to do some of those things, but I go to work for a bigger purpose. And there's a guy that you work with, Craig. We don't want to talk too much about Craig, but Craig says the same thing, right? It's about how you make people feel that makes the difference. I think what attracted us, my team, when we had the opportunity, when we were with a previous business partner, it wasn't that they weren't a good company or a good organization or a good agency. It was just that our team needed something different. It wasn't
Sure.
something that they were going to provide. So we interviewed 9 broker dealers and RIAs, and the reason why we ended up coming to you guys was because of the culture of the company. It was because of the people, right? Because you would talk to folks and it wasn't just like, I'm going to give you the most money, or they lead with, we're the biggest, we're the best. You know, it was like, hey, let's talk about it and let's see if what you're trying to build, you know, works with who we are, which is kind of neat.
Yeah, we say on our team, and I think more broadly in our company, we have 3 guarantees. And number one is you're going to feel relevant at JW Cole. And I think we do a really good job of doing that. Number 2 is you're going to have fun. And you've been to our conferences and you've seen it. And you and I dressed up, 1920s golfers.
Professional golfers.
As our at our last conference. So, so every year we do a themed conference. And I think this was, your 3rd one?
Yes.
3rd conference.
Yep. This
year we didn't, and the theme was 1920s, so the Roaring 20s. We thought it would be a really cool idea.
Yeah.
Dress up in the knickers, and one of our good buddies had some old school golf clubs, so that was a ton of fun.
Yeah.
So we know how to have fun, and then the last promise is we'll make you better, and that's where it comes down to the business and understanding both where you're at now, where you want to be, and trying to figure out how to get you there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting, like in a world of financial planning, so much of it is driven around success, and that focus is around dollars and cents.
Mm-hmm.
And to one extent, it has to be, right? You have to be growing, you have to be profitable like in any business. But finding a purpose to coming to work is probably most important. And then next is having the openness that if I've reached some level of success, am I still open to know that I can learn and get better, right?
Yeah.
And part of the challenges of your team is to not only help those folks, but maybe try to get them to realize that maybe there's an opportunity for you to do something better. But you're talking to somebody that's already had some success in their career, right? It's not like you're bringing somebody brand new in the business. You're working with experienced advisors who've been through it.
Yeah, and it's funny because most of the advisors that we're bringing on are the ones who have been at the big firms, the ones who have been burned, and the ones who probably for most of their career have just felt like a number. And they come in, and a lot of times we have them to the home office, they meet the team. I think right away they can kind of feel, okay, this place is a little bit different. At least that's the goal for us when they walk in, is to show, hey, these are just like normal people. I remember we still joke around about it, but for like the first 3 months that I came to Florida and started working here, I was dressed to the nines. I had my button-down shirt. I was working in New York City, so I had my cufflink shirts. And very quickly I started getting a lot of looks, and they're like, dude, you don't need to dress like
Settle
that here
down,
anymore.
buddy.
Like, you can
settle down.
You can be a real person. So now it's the khakis and, just the good old-fashioned quarter zip. But I think that is a microcosm of who we are, and just, I don't want to say anti-corporate, but more laid back, more down to earth people that you can call and have a real conversation with.
Yeah. I mean, when it's all said and done, you have to be good at what you do, right? You have to be professional. You have to have the products. You have to have the service. You have to have the know-how. You have to have the technology. And what you're trying to do is say to folks, what is our difference? What's the difference about us? And the difference isn't look at how nice my suit or my car or my watch is. The difference isn't necessarily about, payout. The difference is about people, right? Like the people are what make the difference. Yeah. And if you find somebody who's interested in partnering with the right people, then it's an amazing fit. For us, it's been an amazing fit. Yeah. What's the most, give me a story over the last several years, because you've been there, 4 years?
About 3 or 4 years.
3 or 4 years. Give me one of the best stories that's happened since you've been there, and then the next question, which is going to be give me one of the toughest stories, one of the hardest things.
I'll start with one of the best stories, most memorable to me, and this has nothing to do with our advisors. It's a little peek behind the scenes, so to say, about what we do and how we have fun at the home office. Well, it was my probably third week at the company, so this is going back about 3 years. And I remember one of the owners coming in and said, "Hey guys, we're having a mini putt tournament." And everyone's like okay, like a putt tournament, office wide, stop what you're doing. We're doing this. Yeah. So
very professional.
Very professional. Everyone got, I think it was 2 or 3 shots. So picture one hallway, you have your putter, you get 2 shots, and then those little golf holes, right? Yeah. You get it in and it spits it back out. This thing was probably, I don't know, 70 feet, 80 feet down the hall. So we're all taking shots. And then one of our buddies, JP, hits the shot. And I mean, you have probably 60, 70 home office employees at the time just staring, and everyone's having a good time and cheering, but there's a lot of eyeballs, a lot of pressure on you. My buddy JP hits it, and it very quickly got ratcheted up in competitiveness because one of the owners said, "You know what? I think originally it was whoever hits it gets $100." Yeah. And they said, "All right, if another person hits it, we're giving everybody $100."
Ooh.
I get up there, I sink it.
Come on.
I couldn't do that on a real golf course. No, I don't know how I did it here. I think the ball might have ricocheted off the off the cabinets a little bit. Man, everybody went wild. It felt great for me.
Like a cult hero.
Cult hero because everybody got paid.
Yeah.
But instantly I'm like, I just made my boss a lot poorer, and I don't like this.
I know what you were going to say. No, it was great.
So yeah, it was a little bit of a blessing and a curse, but no, it was a really fun time. And it was a good way for me to get to know people because, I had to sign a few autographs after that.
Of course you did. I mean, it's not the first time you've signed autographs. But it's kind of cool, right? It tells you a little bit about that balance between, are we really good at what we do, and can we relate to our people? Because we care about our people and we want them to have fun. What we've talked about a lot, and I've talked to a lot of business owners, is you don't want your team to be sitting around the dinner table on Sunday night going, "Man, I got to go to work tomorrow," right? And your company, the company that you're working with, the company you're working for, the company that you want to be part of, is trying to design a culture where it's like, don't feel bad to go to work tomorrow, right? It could be fun. Yeah, right? We can do stuff like that.
Yeah, I remember in my past life, I was a trader. We were trading mutual funds and individual securities, and if you got a trading error, you'd get a coaching from your manager. They'd bring you in a dark room and kind of slap you with a ruler, so to speak. But if you got 2 or 3 of those, you were fired effectively. So I remember talking with people saying, "Man, I'm literally going to sleep at night thinking about this stuff, and sometimes having nightmares about potentially losing my job." So that was one example. Another example is, if work started at 8:30 and you came in at 8:35, you were getting written up.
Yeah.
And look, life happens, and especially in a place like New York City where the trains are delayed all the time, and there's just a lot of craziness that can happen. It's just not a good feeling. Yeah. And I think at JW Cole, what we do a great job with is balancing that with everybody also still is on a mission and works really, really hard. but not to the detriment of, sacrificing your mental health and being nervous that if you walk in 3 minutes late one day because, there was an accident on the highway, that your job is at risk.
Because the assumption really is that you made every effort to get there and do your best, not the assumption of I'm looking over your shoulder to figure out whether you made it on time.
Everyone's treated like an adult. And I think, and look, it's hard, right? As the organization grows and you're at thousands or maybe tens of thousands of employees, that's going to come with some level of micromanagement. But it is nice at a place like here, like you're running, or at a mid-sized broker dealer like we are, to actually be trusted like an adult and know that you're going to get the job done.
Yeah, it's kind of nice.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't mean that there's not accountability.
Sure.
Right? Like, you still have to show up. You still have to do your job. You have to do it well. If you don't get everything done exactly right, there's some report that comes down to you and says, how do we do it better? And if you consistently underperform, then you're probably not going to be part of the team. It's just that's not what we lead with. Right?
Exactly.
We don't lead with that.
We don't lead it. We trust that everybody's going to do a job. At the end of the day, there's certainly accountability that goes into it. But the team does a really good job of holding each other accountable and making sure that you do your part, because you don't want to let down the team.
Yeah. And it's cool to get to that culture.
Yeah, and I see that here with you guys too. I mean, one of the areas that we always highlight with you is your team, and it's your process. And I think you've done such a great job through the years, and that's why we've enjoyed working with you, bringing you on, was it 3-4 years ago now?
3 years ago in November.
3 years
ago last week.
That's one of the main things that we highlight about you and your team, and Nicole and Keegan and Jesse, and everybody knows their job. They come in every day.
Yeah.
And I think they have fun doing it. You could tell like the culture around here is great too.
Yeah. So we just spent a little time with someone else. We've been talking about what the future is, right? And the biggest thing for me is, as we continue to grow, is to grow sustainably, to grow where we don't give up who we are, to make sure our culture is there. Because we do believe that, a business that's not growing is dying. You can't stay the same, right? You have to continue to do that. But how do you do that and not lose the culture? So for my practice, it's a microcosm of what JW Cole is. That's why I was so connected to it, right? They're trying to grow and get bigger, but you just sit there and say, well, man, if we're a team of 1,000 home office employees, it's hard to have the same culture as if we're 25, right? And there's some balance inside there.
Yeah.
Which is kind of neat.
Yeah, so I guess I'll put that question back to you. It's like, as you become more successful in your career and you add either staff or advisors or whoever it is to your, we'll call it a family here, how do you maintain that culture when Mark becomes less involved in the day-to-day, every year?
When I spend time with small businesses, the focus that I talk to them about that generally isn't in front of them is this idea of culture is everything. That's the reality of it. So I spend a lot of time deliberately thinking about, how do my decisions affect our culture? Mm-hmm. It sounds cliche, but it's 100% true. If somebody comes in late, if they mess something up, if they do a good job, if they have something going on in their lives, the language that I use is not always right, but I really try to think through, what am I saying, when, and why.
Sure.
And you say, well, does that really matter? Because you're running a job, you're running a business. So get there, do your work, and be done. In my estimation, it does, right? Legacy is just this small little company that revolves around me. But at the end of the day, it doesn't go without anybody, without all these other folks. So if I put myself as part of the team, and I'm as important as everybody else, but not more important than anyone else. Mm-hmm. And the team believes that, and they believe that I care about them, and I do care about them, then it works. Again, it still comes back to, we have to be good at what we do. We have to make good decisions. Sure. We have to put people first. We're not perfect. There are certain people that are better partners with us, and we're better partners with them than others. And we need to understand that that's okay. So, broader picture. I was reading this book, the newest book was called The Comfort Crisis. And
Did I put you onto that book?
I don't know if you did.
That is my favorite all-time book.
Come on.
I hope you know that.
I have no
swear to
idea.
God.
I'm not even sure that you did tell me
Michael
that.
Easter, I may have planted that seed in your head at one point. I
think
can't
I'm
take
actually-
full credit.
I think I'm actually mad at you that you didn't tell me about it sooner. I think that might be the case.
I don't know why I wouldn't have.
Anyway,
Incredible, right?
yeah, so you start reading through it, and fundamentally the lesson is in the title, right? It's this whole idea that as we get more comfortable, it becomes harder and harder to reach our potential, right? And the idea is if we continue to push ourselves, then that deliberate effort to push yourself continues to make you grow. And to the extent that we've made everything else around ourselves so comfortable, like you lay in a soft bed, when you roll over, your feet hit the ground. You don't have to get up off the ground. Your feet hit the ground. You stand up, and for most of us, we're steps from hot water, a bathroom, a shower, a toilet. We walk to a place where we store refrigerated food that's there. And within minutes, we boil water. We do whatever else we do. So it makes us softer. That's it. Like it just is, right? And you go back 100 years, you go back 200 years, and holy cow, were things harder. So there's a section of that book that makes me think about our practice and the fact that I want to continue to get better, and by doing that, I have to make tough decisions that push who I am. I think my cell phone's going on. That'll be kind of cool for the podcast. So I want to continue to make decisions that push me to the edge, and sometimes they're going to work out amazing, and sometimes maybe not so much. One of the parts of that book that I thought was super interesting as a guy who was a psychology major in college was the whole part that the happiest cultures of the world are the ones who understand that at some point in life you die. Like at the end of this all, we won't be here. Like 100 years from now, all the stuff you've collected that you thought was dear is in a landfill or somebody else owns it.
Yeah, they even tell you in the book to intentionally think about your death and what that could look like. I think every day or a couple times a day.
Well, yeah, and it's a hard. Who wants to do that? You know
what? What sounds weird? I've tried doing that, and I think it just brings what that book did for me is it brings a lot of perspective.
Yeah.
Right. And if you think about that, because we get caught in the day-to-day routine, and we get upset because we hit traffic on the way to work, and you got to go to the gym after and put food on the table and pick up the kids from school, and then you take a step back and you're like, wait a second. Our time on earth is finite, and I really do have to be more intentional and try to do a better job of appreciating what's in front of me, because we never know when that last day is going to be.
Right. Well, and it also, in theory, the thing that I've struggled with for years is work-life balance. What that does is it helps me look and say the things that are driving a significant amount of stress to me or my clients or my friends, they don't really matter. It's hard to say that because people are like, it's easy to say nothing matters. Because yes, it does matter, right? You want to do a good job. You want to call people back. You want to make an impact. You want to help people feel loved and wanted. You want to tell the folks that don't want to do that to go away. Like you're a negative person, just get away from me. You want to experience the things that you want to experience. And it's not saying that you shouldn't do that. It's just saying in the large scheme of things, 25, 30 years from now, if we are both on this planet, whatever's going on right now doesn't really matter.
It doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter. Yeah. So how do you balance this whole idea of this is important with, hey man, don't make this like ruin your day or your week or your month. Like there was this little thing that just happened, right? A couple of days before we're sitting in this podcast room, this little thing called the election. And it's driven a tremendous amount of stress for lots of people, millions and millions of people. And now we sit here and there's lots of people that are ridiculously happy. There's lots of people that are fear for what's next. And there's a whole bunch of people in the middle that are like, whatever. Doesn't make any difference to me anyway. 20 years from now, unless you're thinking as a negative Nelly, 20 years from now, will it make a difference? Maybe. We'll be sitting there thinking about it? No. I started in the business, and I remember watching the World Trade Center fall as a junior associate. I thought the world was going to be different forever. It has been, But today, you don't think about.
It's not part of what you think about when you wake up in the
No,
morning.
it isn't.
No.
It just isn't. And it's not that I don't care about it, and how it's just what was the most important thing for a year or 2 or 3 or 4. It just is what it is.
Yeah.
It's history.
Yeah, it always comes back to, I mean, in sales, they talk a lot about like drivers and motivators. And when you're having conversations with clients, in order to really build that trust and build that relationship, trying to figure out what's at the core of what makes that person tick, figure out their why. And I think for most people, what it really comes down to, the number one answer is probably family, right? Family, close friends, relationships, the people that care about you. In Comfort Crisis, I think they call it is it a misogi?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, do something really, really difficult to where you only have a 50% chance of completing that task. So for me, I've been thinking a lot about that and what that could mean for my life. I'm thinking about doing, don't hold me to it. All right. We're going to have to
down. This is
edit this part out if I don't do it, but doing a sprint triathlon in the spring.
Okay.
So it's not the full blown Ironman, but it's a triathlon. It's where I think it's 15 miles biking. It's
half a mile swim
and 3 mile run. Yeah. So that's something that I want to try.
Yeah.
Something else that I did recently that you and I have talked about was I recently did a trip out to Wyoming.
Yeah.
And for me, that was really stepping out of my comfort zone. So it was a 5-night trip. It was 30 miles south of Yellowstone. So we were in the woods.
Yep.
And we were sleeping in tents, and the furnaces that were in there were 70 years old, and you had to load the logs in, and guess what? It was 20 degrees at night, and 3 hours into your sleep, it was cold in there again.
Yeah.
And you had to make the decision, am I getting out of my sleeping bag to be freezing for about 5 minutes so I can load these logs in, or am I just going to shiver here for the rest of the night? So it was uncomfortable, and we'd wake up at 5 o'clock every morning, and we'd have breakfast, and then we'd get on horseback and go through the woods. And man, it was freezing cold, and at one point it was sleeting and snowing, and the horses are slipping, and
just not something you're used to every day.
You're riding in the dark. And newsflash, that's grizzly territory out there, and we saw a ton of grizzly tracks. So the heart rate's up a little bit, and your head's on a swivel. But man, the feeling of like accomplishment after the trip, just to be like, I did that, and I did something that I've never done before, and I took myself out of my comfort zone, and I was able to push there and do it.
Yeah.
It gives you this really cool feeling of like, man, I can take that feeling back, and it translates to so many other parts of your personal life or business.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if I can do that, man, I can pretty much put my mind to do anything.
It's pretty amazing. So when I listened to that book, and I was driving to Wyoming on this hunting adventure too, and I remember sitting there thinking that 10 years ago, when I would go on these adventures, there was things that the guides would expect me to do that I didn't want to say no to, because I'm like, well, I'm a big, strong man. I'm not gonna not do this. But it made me nervous. And today, when they ask me to do some of those things, or that's what's expected, it's just kind of normal. It's just easy. So I think I told you that I'm in the process of trying to write this book, which is like the hardest thing in the world from a guy who's like not a good writer. And I was sitting with a friend of mine as we're trying to figure it out, and I was telling the story of this adventure that I had when I went to Africa last year. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done, partially because of the physical challenge, but the main part was because of the mental challenge.
Yeah.
So when I was in another place a couple of months ago, and it was hot and we were walking a lot, I was sitting there thinking like, well, this is nothing compared to, right? Because I had pushed myself to a point that I was like, man, I didn't really know that I could do this. Like, I was wondering, am I going to survive this thing? So that whole idea of the comfort crisis, of trying to push yourself to a point where you may or may not do it. Amy and I were talking about it, and it's amazing, right? Like, you go to that trip that you did in Wyoming, that set a new bar. It set a new baseline for where you are. So if you're sitting in Tampa, there's really no uncomfortableness that you're going to have in Tampa Bay that's similar to that.
No.
Right? So your next one might be the same. It might be less. It might be more, but it just continues to push you. So in your business life, when you're uncomfortable, are you really all that uncomfortable? Because you know, like at some point,
Relatively speaking, right?
Yeah,
you compare it to those experiences.
you do, which is kind of neat.
All right, I have to tell one embarrassing story.
All right, hit me.
All right, so we're on the trip, and I told the guide, I said, this is my first time ever on horseback, right? So probably looking back, not the best time to ride a horse for the first time, and 10,000 feet and, through the mountains of Yellowstone. But he's like, all good. He's like, just here's a couple, little tips for the horse, and just pull back in the reins if you want him to stop or move back. So I'm like, all right, this doesn't seem too hard.
Easy.
But as you know, horses can sense things. And the guide actually told us that they can feel or sense your heartbeat as you get within 4 feet of them. So that's how in tune with your energy they are. So this horse can clearly tell I am nervous, right? I mean, I am just
I don't spend a lot of time around huge
crossing
animals.
myself with one hand and I'm holding the reins with the other hand. The horse at one point started getting a little finicky. And looking back, it wasn't totally my fault. Probably only 60%. But they were smelling a lot of bear. There was a lot of grizzly bear in the area, and the horses know, and they get spooked and they start acting weird. My horse started to sprint up the mountain. As he was sprinting, I lost control of the reins, and my guide is like, just grab the rein. And I'm like, I can't. I'm screaming. I'm like, I can't. I dropped the reins. I don't have them. So this horse probably went 200 or 300 feet up this mountain and then just paused. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to move. And thankfully, I saw the guide come, and kind of saved the day. He's like, dude, just get off the horse. He's like, I'll ride this one. I did feel slightly redeemed when he got on the horse. And he started having issues.
Yeah.
So it wasn't totally me, but man, it was scary. But to think back and just to be like, I did that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's really hard, even as you tell the story, for the average person to even say it was like, it's no big deal. But you can't take the emotion and the feeling of that moment and recreate it with words.
Yeah.
You can kind of see it in the video, but you don't feel it the same way.
Yeah.
You just don't.
Yeah. So a huge, I guess, part of that book that still resonates with me that I think about is, in today's society, we're doing a couple things wrong. So number one, social media, what that's doing, what this instant gratification society now that we have built does to us, is it raises our threshold to when we get the same dopamine hits.
Yeah.
Right? So like if I'm just scrolling social media, it's highly stimulating for the brain.
Yeah.
Watching these videos, or I'm on YouTube, right? You think about, when is the last time that you were truly bored? Kind of never, because if you're waiting at the doctor's office, or if you're waiting at a red light, it's hard, sad to admit it, but what do? We whip out our phone and check our email, or make a call, or hop on Instagram real quick. But what we're effectively doing is we're raising the bar that our brain now takes to receive that dopamine hit. And it becomes harder and harder to get that same feeling of satisfaction, which is not a good thing.
Right.
On the opposite end of the spectrum, what we're doing when we create this life of comfort is that we are lowering our threshold for pain and struggle. So now if we don't have, if we sleep anywhere outside of our bed that isn't memory foam king, it's a big deal. And it ticks us off and it bothers us. So to take the experiences like you and I do, and to travel and to put ourselves intentionally in hard situations, it's a good reset for those levels. And I think everyone should challenge themselves to do it, because I think it really, really helps.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's interesting, right? Because we're not going backwards. It's not like all of a sudden we're going to have less stimulation go in our lives. Or it's not like 10 years from now things will be easier. Or they will be easier, and there's not going to be less stuff for us to look at or engage with. Like this whole AI platform is, how can we engage with you easier and faster?
Yeah.
Not how can you sit outside and do nothing, right? I remember that inside that book he was talking about how folks in Japan will take walks 10 or 15 minutes a day, even in the city, but in the city there's a tree or there's grass. And that connection with nature and that time to do nothing made a big difference in the psychology but also like heart health. Like they have less heart disease because they spend more time outside. And you're like, oh, that's witchcraft. Yeah, but it kind of works, right? It seems like it kind of works. So with this whole idea of trying to take perspective in life, is I want to be successful, and if I am successful, I have an impact. It makes me feel good. I scroll to find some level of balance in my life, but I take these trips, and when I take these trips, I unplug. Maybe not 100% unplug, but I get to a point where I go for a walk, or it doesn't have to be physical. Some people, like, you read a book, you get lost in something that allows you to bring your whole body down to some basic level. And I think that makes us better people. It makes us more productive, right? There's less drama. We both like drama, right? Like we exchange videos every now and then on certain platforms, right? That make you laugh, and it's fun. And it's not saying that you can't have any fun. It's just saying, hey, look, like every now and then, it's okay to not make that phone call back right that second. Right. It's okay to not text right back that second.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And trying to take what we're talking about, and this was not planned, by the way, talk about the comfort crisis. I'm excited that it landed here because I care so much about that book. But taking those lessons and applying it to the business world, I think in the same calls with clients, we have some hard calls, right? Yeah. And we have difficult conversations with clients and maybe even employees. And what can seemingly feel like the end of the world and man, like this just ruined my day, you then reflect back on the experiences that were actually hard. And it just puts into perspective like, hey, this is just part of life, right? And I want to get the most out of life, and these things that happen to me, these inconveniences, might not be the end of the world. In fact, they might be a good thing, right? Because it helps us kind of get back to that reset.
And it gives you the ability to move on, right? So I always look at it, and I played sports growing up as a kid. I played sports in college. My boys did that. And I wanted them to succeed. I wanted them to do really well. But the other part was because I think it helped them like mature, because they realized that you don't win every time, even if you're the best, right? You don't lose every time, even if you're not the best. There's work that goes into things. There's pain that goes into things. There's discomfort that goes into things. Sometimes you work super hard and lose, and sometimes you don't work really hard at all and win. And hopefully in their lives, they get to their business lives and realize that when they come up with some sort of obstacle, this is not the end of the world. Like there's a season. There's a season to life. There's a season to business. There's a season to relationships.
Yeah.
And being able to be intentionally uncomfortable has helped them, right? Whether that's recitals or dance or hikes or soccer or football, it doesn't really matter. It's just like teaching somebody not to say you're okay. I listened to a guy the other day, and I was listening to this podcast, and he says maybe one of the worst things you can do to your kids is saying you're so smart, you're so good at it. So like I'm sitting there going, all right, here we go. Where's the punchline, right? His punchline is this: if you say to them you're so smart and you're so good at it, what happens when they're not good at it?
Right.
Then they're like, oh my gosh, I'm not good enough.
They're going to be debilitated.
Right, because they're sitting there saying, well, but I've always been smart enough.
Sure.
I've always been good enough, but now it didn't work. So his focus was what you should say to those children is, you worked really hard for that. You did a good job. You worked hard to make that happen. Yeah. So when the eventuality of some sort of failure or disappointment comes, the natural reaction is, I just got to work a little harder next time. Not, I'm not good enough because I used to be smart enough.
Yeah, and when they're coddled, right? Sometimes you see the most coddled people fail. And I think that's just because they're not used to adversity. Yeah. And they weren't forced to look themselves in the mirror and face those feelings of uncomfortability. And now all of a sudden they don't have the skills to handle that. Yeah. And it totally ruins them. This might be a little extreme. I saw a post on Facebook the other day. It got a lot of comments, mostly negative, but there was this, I think it was like a pool training center. They're trying to teach kids how to swim. Yep. And this woman has a very extreme stance. She literally tossed the baby in the pool.
I've seen it.
And this baby was no more than like 6 months old.
Yep.
and it's like floating there, and your natural reaction is like, oh my God, I need to jump in. And she did, but
Sure.
it was like a solid
Right.
5 seconds after. The baby was good, but her whole premise is like, look, the baby was in the womb for 9 months. They're sort of used to it, but the baby is going to figure out how
Right.
to
Roll over.
roll over. Maybe not swim per se
Right.
yet, but to actually, but I digress. The comment section was a lot of fun.
Yeah, because they look at it and they say, I can't believe you would put that child through that trauma. And realistically, she looks at it and says, I'm giving that child the best chance to learn how to swim.
Mhm.
Because if you're fearful, right? Plus, there's a natural reaction to say, hey, I want to survive.
Sure.
Right? And if you take that away, it becomes harder. I wanted to go back to your point. I've been fascinated with this one word, and I've read a couple of books about it, and it's a chapter that I'm trying to develop in this book. And it's exactly what you said. It's resiliency. How do you build resiliency? How do you build resiliency in your practice? How do you build resiliency in your life, in your relationships? And the reality is resiliency isn't built from comfort. It's not that everything has always gone really well, so I'm resilient. Resiliency comes
When
from
things go wrong,
conflict, from bad things, from things that have made me uncomfortable. To be more resilient in business, it's not that things have ever gone that way. It's like, man, I've had some times where it wasn't going well, where I didn't have enough money, I didn't get the case, I'm not getting along with my partner. To be resilient in relationships, it's not like we come home every day and everything's rainbows and sunshine. Like, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes we're not getting along. Sometimes they're making me mad. Resiliencies in friendships, resiliencies in anything.
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated sometimes because everybody wants to be resilient, but nobody really wants to put the time and
Nobody
effort
puts in
into
the
it.
work. No.
Yeah.
No, I feel like as a society, we're getting a lot softer as the comforts continue to tick up, and with AI coming out, and just all these different technologies that feel good in the short term, but it does make you question, okay, is this truly what's best for me in the long term? Is this really going to help me to survive, right? Because we go from our comfy, warm bed in the morning to work where we're sitting all day, and then we come home and we're sitting on the couch. It's like, is that really the best lifestyle, for me and trying to build that resiliency for the long term?
Yeah. And it seems like of the men and women that I admire who are older than I, the thing that they continue to do is to grow. They continue to learn a new skill, to do something that is hard. And what they did was they just built upon skills over a lifetime that they know the people, they know how to do it, they know what they've done. And in my mind, I look at them, and I guess now that I think about it, like, they're super resilient because they've just done it. Like, well, I've laid a tile floor, I've cut down a tree, right? I've been married, I've been divorced, I've had kids that have gone to college. I've been that coach that's yelled at the ref, and I've been that parent who said, "Hey, just settle down. They're just getting paid $25 to be here on a Saturday." So it's kind of neat, but I don't know that we intentionally wake up every day and say, "How do I build resiliency into my life and my business? How do I get to a point where I'm continuing to raise that bar where I'm comfortable?" In other words, I'm pushing myself all the time. I'm making that call, I'm having that conversation, because it's too easy once you have some level of success to say, forget it, it's them, it's not me.
Sure.
Forget those people, we don't care, it doesn't matter, we'll just move on.
Yeah.
But what are we really doing to ourselves and our practices?
Yeah, so I minored in psychology. Mm-hmm. So where I went to school, Bryant, which was not
business school,
not totally too far
Rhode
from
Island,
where,
right?
In Rhode Island, yep. Yeah. Nobody in Florida knows what that is, so glad I paid all that money to go
Excellent.
there. Good old fashioned New England education. But it was a pretty cool program, because if you majored in business, which most people did, it was a business school, finance, accounting, econ. You had a minor in a liberal arts. So mine was psychology. So for me, I'm always fascinated when I see these parallels between psychology and the work that we do.
Yeah.
That was most apparent when I was doing financial planning, and I was primarily doing a lot of retirement planning. So I'm working with folks that are 65 up, but really kind of in that like 70 to 80-year-old zone.
Yeah.
And there was a theme there, and I realized it at a young age when I was probably 25, 26 at a time, and I'm somehow dealing, and these 85-year-olds
Yeah.
are trusting little Jonathan with their money. But I learned so many lessons from that, and I genuinely took the time to learn about them and their stories and what was important to them. And one of the themes that I saw was that the folks who just retired and did nothing, those are the folks who decline the fastest,
No doubt.
both cognitively, physically, and everything else. So the folks who I saw have the most longevity and have the most resilience and live the longest and live the most fulfilled lives are the people who continued to find whatever their passion was after work was done.
Yeah.
So, who knows what that is? If you were a bricklayer, obviously, like, it might not be to continue to lay bricks, but it might be to now travel with your wife or do woodworking or something to keep yourself engaged, both physically. But I do think, and I love making the connections back to evolutionary psychology. If our brain realizes that we're just sitting on the couch and watching mindless TV all day, that's not signaling to our brain that, hey, we need to keep this body alive and we need to keep learning and growing. But on the contrary, if you're using your brain, to go out and you're doing physical exercise, like, that's signaling to your brain, hey, we need to keep this thing alive longer, and we need to help this person survive.
I agree with you. There's been so many things floating around the internet that shows like two women and they're both 70, and one of them's in like an old grandma nightgown with a walker and slippers going across the kitchen, and the kitchen's a 1975 kitchen, and then the other lady is walking in the park, with spandex and running shoes on, like relatively fit, but they're the same age, right? And we've all seen people who are 60 who look like they're 40, and we see people who are 60 who look like they're 80.
Sure.
Right? And people will say, well, part of that's genetic, probably. Part of that is, where they worked and what they did. Yeah, maybe. But we have the ability to make that change. We have the ability to make that difference, right? Bad things happen to good people. I understand that. But the reality of sitting there saying, I need to stay stimulated, I need to stay active, that gives you the best opportunity to keep going.
100%. My grandma is 98 years old. She stopped working when she was like 85. She worked at the bank in Cambridge, which is just outside of Boston. She stopped driving. Gosh, I don't even want to admit this, but maybe when she was 90.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have want to be on the roads when she was out there. But
would have been nice for her to take another test sometime. Somewhere between 80 and 90 when she's taking
that's a
the
different
driver's
story.
test.
Right. Yeah, maybe we should look at some legislation. But connecting those dots, 98, 99 years old, and she was just always somebody that pushed herself, and she wanted to stay connected, and her husband had passed away, when they were in their, I think, 40s or 50s. So largely she was kind of, the independent breadwinner for the family, and she even still to this day is sort of like the matriarch of the family.
Yeah.
But it's because she just had one speed, and I think that's that old school mentality, and probably a little help from the Italian genes.
Yeah.
But she just kept going, and she's starting to finally decline now, but mentally she is still sharp as a tack.
Yeah. It's kind of neat.
Yeah.
It's really
fun
neat
to see.
Yeah. So, you and I have a lot in common, even though we've just kind of get to know each other, right? So obviously we're in the same industry, similar, we're in the same industry. I was a psychology major in college, which was interesting.
I did not know that. Learning new things.
I always had an interest in business. I enjoy the outdoors. Over the last decade in particular, I've spent more time with like hunting and some of those things because I just find it relaxing. I like it. I love the challenge. Mm-hmm. But ever since I was in college, I would do the outdoor thing. I did the outing program in college, and I worked for it for a couple of summers, and that was just always important.
Were you a Boy Scout?
No, I did Cub Scouts.
Because I know you know your knots pretty well.
Yeah, I'm pretty good with knots.
Yeah,
So
you were showing off last time we were together.
I was. So when I was in college, the school that Amy and I and the boys went to, they have an outing kind of leisure study requirement. So you have to do La Vida, where you go on a 9-day trip in the Adirondacks, or you have to do a half a semester course where it's partially classroom, partially in the woods, where you do ropes courses and stuff. So I told my kids and my wife and I that we went to the one where we went to the Adirondacks and did the 9-day trip. So I did it and I loved it, and then I ended up working there for the next 3 years in the summers. And for a couple of those summers, I was the head mountaineer. So I would go to the rock face that we would bring the kids to, and as part of their 9-day expedition, they would spend a day on the ropes course and a day rock climbing. And I would go there and I would set up the rock climb. I'd run the rock climb for a group in the morning and a group in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of have to learn your knots, because like you're setting this thing up and the knot kind of has to hold.
Your life kind of depends on it.
Yeah, and really, the kids did as well. So I've always loved that. And when I got out of college, I worked for a company called Project Adventure, and we built ropes courses. The things in the trees where you zip lines and all that stuff. So as a builder, you would have to learn the knots, and then you would have to splice rope and move things around. So it just became part of who I was. Mm-hmm. So now one of the funniest things is whenever something has to be tied down, then most of the people in my family are like, all right, just ask Mark.
You're the guy.
Because you will be judged.
You're the knot guy. Yeah,
unless I do.
Sure.
Yeah. But yeah, it's fun.
So where do you see, so we talked about trips and challenges. Do you have anything fun coming up for the next year? I know you do.
Yeah. I get a bad rap, Jonathan. I get a bad rap. Part of it is because I have a great team, so it allows me the ability to travel a little bit. Travel is the thing that pushes me. I love the experience piece. I know it works because, if I have a 10 or 12 or 14-day trip planned, kind of in that 7-8 day range, and like I want to get home, right? Because I care about my family, and I care about my business, and I care about my clients. So the fact that I want to go home is a good thing, right? But
I think your wife likes that too.
I think, she's all right with it. She wants me to come home every now and then. So this idea of having a trip, like that whole FOMO idea of like fear of missing out, as soon as I get back, I always say, man, I just don't want to travel for a while. And then I'm home for like a week, and I'm like, I wonder when the next one's going to happen. So I'm really good at scheduling trips. And we've got some family ski trips out west, which has become something that we've done for years, and I love it. I've got some travel to some conferences, which is kind of neat. I'm going to try to drag you to Texas, I think, in February or March. And then I've got a trip to New Zealand in April. And then my youngest boy is getting married, which is kind of cool, in June.
That's awesome.
And then I'm going to go to Mozambique with Amy in July.
You tried to get me on that trip.
Yeah.
And I Googled it, and the map zoomed in, and that resort looks amazing.
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Really amazing. I don't know if I'm there yet. I don't know if I'm ready for that, because once you do a trip like that, that raises the bar,
It does
right?
set the bar high, which is not ordinarily a good thing. So here's how it happened. So in a month or so, I'm going to have Andy Buchanan on the podcast, and he's the guy that I've met from Africa, born and raised in Zimbabwe. I saw him, I saw his YouTube channel. I fell in love with it. I thought he was just an awesome guy. I sent him a note. I'm like, there's no way this dude's like writing me back. The next morning, he wrote me back. We hooked up through WhatsApp. We were talking, and then all of a sudden, I've got this trip planned. But I'm like, I want to bring my wife. He's like, no big deal. And he's like, well, how is she? Like, is it like a Marriott type safari, or is this like, can you go there? So he was really good at helping that whole piece. So I've gone on 3 safaris with Andy. And then I said, Andy, it's time that Amy's got to come back. But she's a school teacher, so it has to be in July. And she's going to want to see some other things. It can't just be like take Mark into the bush for 12 days and leave like we've done in the past. Because I'm fully content with that.
She's going to love that, right?
Yeah, so she's coming with me. We're going to do 10 days in the bush in Mozambique, and then there's this little archipelago of islands just off the coast, and there's this resort that's just one of those things that's absolutely amazing. And she wanted to experience something different, so we're gonna spend some time in a little a little room on some stilts in the middle of the Indian Ocean that kind of looks out over the water, and
That's a dream
pretty
vacation
excited
right there.
Yeah.
Little different than Syracuse, New York, I would say.
Yeah, I'd say a little different. I mean, everything from environment, sights, smells, sounds, temperature, but then it's culture too, right? And everybody there wants you to be. They want you to be happy, right?
Yeah.
Like they want you to be content. They want you to have a great time, and it's just weird. It's going to be amazing.
So you've done a few trips now to Africa. What is the coolest animal that you've seen, and why?
So I think it's hard to say what is the coolest animal. The one that has gotten my heart racing the most is when I saw the leopard for the first time.
Okay, I thought you were going to say some type of like 15-foot poisonous snake.
Yeah, well, that one wasn't so good
Leopard
either.
counts too.
Yeah, well, so I've been to Africa 5 times. I went once on a missions trip when I was in college, and we did a safari. I went once with Cornell on a leadership trip, and then I went 3 times last year on these safaris. And when you see an elephant, from a truck, it's like, oh, that's cool. It's kind of like a zoo. When you're walking through the woods and you walk into an elephant, you're like, ooh, this is slightly different.
Because they get aggressive, right?
Yeah, they get aggressive, they get loud, just, it's a scary thing.
They let you know that you're in their home.
100%.
Yeah.
When you see a lion in a truck, you're like, that's not so great. When you see a lion and you're walking, they get your attention. And it's cool to see the hyenas and the giraffe and the zebras. The first time I saw a leopard, I'm a pretty laid back guy when it comes to that stuff. I don't really get super high. I don't know why. Maybe it's kind of the experience over time. But the first time that we were actually sitting in a blind, and I saw this leopard come, my heart rate doubled, immediately. And I was like, whew. And I had been to what I thought was some sketchy pieces.
Sure.
In that same safari, we were going to look for some buffaloes, and as we were walking down, there's this baseball size reptile that's in the tree that's going forever, as you see him as he's going down, and all of the African guys just stopped. And we kind of look over and you can kind of see it. You're starting to get used to seeing things that are different. And they're like, black mamba. And they all stop. And the African guys aren't afraid of much because they've grown up there. We walked and saw cobras and some of those things, and they would just kind of shoo them away. And but when they saw the mamba, everybody stopped. Everybody wanted to see where that thing was going, and everybody went in the other direction.
And that's why Kobe Bryant earned the nickname Black Mamba.
I think so. I think that's what it was. I think 100%. But so it was. It's just so amazing to see it. I know that if you're in the U.S., people don't think about going to Africa, right? Very often they go to Europe, they go to the Caribbean, they go to Mexico. But you don't have that. If you're in Europe, a lot of people will vacation in Africa because they market that way. So, but I always wanted to go somewhere that would push me out of the comfort zone. And Cancun's cool, but I don't feel super pushed out of my comfort zone in Cancun. And if I go to Jamaica, it's nice.
Right.
But it's hey, you want to go walk up the falls? It's sure. And if something goes bad, you just keep walking, and there's somebody there, and you'd be like, how do I get back to the resort?
Yeah.
In Africa, that's not the way it is. We take an 1.5-hour plane ride, and they drop you off at a landing strip, and then you drive an hour to some thatched roof camp. It's well,
that's crazy.
If something goes wrong here, then we've kind of got a little problem.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
So those were some crazy experiences. I mean, most people would be lucky to do 1 or 2 of those trips in a lifetime. You've done a few of them. I mean, how do you feel when you get back? Do you feel like you're able to give more to your clients and more energy to your business because you've reset and you feel mentally refreshed?
Yeah, I think there's a point where you're just trying to recover. There's no doubt about it. But one of the things I've said, and I wrote in the blog, and there's a section in the book, if we ever get this book done, there's a section in the book that says, I think the travel and the time away makes me a better advisor. And the main reason for that isn't because I'm gone, it's because it allows me to interact with more people around the world. Airports, coffee shops, hotels, in the bush, some of these other places. And the more interactions I think I have with people, the better I can relate and connect to people, even if they're just here or they're around the United States. Because now what you're doing is you're seeing somebody and interacting with somebody and trying to deliberately connect with somebody that you have zero in common with, or very little in common with. And your interaction might be 10 or 15 seconds, or it might be 10 or 15 days. But the reality is I think it makes me a better advisor because I can read more people. I was a philosophy major for a little while in college. And then I gave that up because I was really bad at reading the philosophy. And the technology wasn't around where somebody could read it to me.
Sure.
But there was this idea in philosophy that was saying to really truly know, like, the creator, to really truly know God, you needed to know every living thing on the planet. So I remember thinking about that. It was like, imagine if your goal was to meet everybody, or to meet as many people as you can. And if you did, and you had the ability to have a conversation like this with those people, how would your worldview change? So when I travel, part of what I'm doing is fun. Part of what I'm doing is challenging myself.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find these new experiences, but I love interacting with these people. And I have names of people around the country and around the world in my phone that I can text. And those people, it's not that I have their number that matters, it's that they have my number. So when I text one of those guys in Zimbabwe, it doesn't just come up with my phone number, it comes up with Mark Maude. And that's pretty cool because I made a connection and they know who I am.
Yeah.
They made a deliberate decision to put me in the phone. And I know that when I text Andy or I text Dalton, I know there's all these people that I've met there, and it makes me think about them. And I think about Tungai, who spent 12 days with me. And then when he's done, he put on his jeans and he went back to his village. I'm like, that's pretty interesting. And when I was sitting here, if he was sitting in here, we have a little bit of a communication difference because English wasn't his first language, but you wouldn't think he would be that much different. But if you were to follow him back to his house, totally different. Like I gave Rendai, a guy in August, a tip that I thought was reasonable for the work that he did. And the professional hunter came to me and he said, you just bought his roof. Well, what does that mean, Peter? I bought his roof? He goes, he's been saving for years to build a house for his family, and they have everything there, and he has to buy the purlins and buy the thatch to build the roof. And it cost the exact amount of money that you gave him as your tip. He goes, so you bought that family a roof. And then that's when it starts to hit you. You're like, all right, well, the world's different. Like it's way different than Syracuse, New York, Tampa, Florida,
Absolutely.
Peabody, Massachusetts. So I think that traveling refreshes me, but it brings me back to a different level of perspective of when somebody's nervous about the election or not nervous about the election, nervous about running out of money, not nervous about running out of money, getting separated, wanting to start an IRA, wondering whether they're doing the right things. Your perspective changes so that you have some compassion, maybe a bit more compassion, maybe some empathy for them, because you see resilience, you see what resilience really is. And I compare myself to those folks and be like, man, I'm not doing enough. I have to be more compassionate. I have to be more empathetic. And I'm not perfect. Sense.
Yeah, what's neat is, and I also didn't realize that you were a psychology major, is our world, as I said, there's so much blending of psychology and money management and financial planning. And I think, and you've seen it, you've been in the industry a little bit longer than I have. It's gone from back in the 80s, if you watched Wolf of Wall Street, this version of, a stockbroker, which is what I wanted to be when I grew up.
Buddy.
I got in the industry and I'm like, man, we're not having crazy parties and selling stocks to people. I thought I thought that's what it was.
Yeah.
And then you quickly realize, for good reason, probably it's not like that.
Yeah.
But we've seen the industry morph into what a modern day financial advisor is now more of a coach, right?
Yeah.
It's more of almost like a therapist around their finances. And I find that cool, and I'm sure you do too. It's rewarding, it's challenging, but you are way more managing psychology sometimes in a person's emotion, just as much, if not more, you are than their own money and finances. And there's so much talk out there, both now but in the past, of like, is a financial advisor worth it?
Yeah.
Are they worth the fee?
Yeah.
And there's been so many studies out there that say absolutely.
Sure.
And it might not necessarily be as much as it once was based on the performance of their stock portfolio.
Right.
But there's a lot of cool studies out there. I know Vanguard does one, Russell does one. They call it the value of an advisor.
Yeah.
In a large proportion of that, the alpha that they're getting in that relationship with you and your team here at Legacy is that coaching, that behavioral aspect of it, because election is a huge piece. I saw a lot of people make some really bad mistakes for the 2016 election, because look, let's face it, no matter what side you were on, people were nervous.
Sure.
Right? And there was a lot of uncertainties. The media loves to stoke the flames on that because they're getting views, they're getting clicks, and clients panicked. You saw that, I saw that, and people make some very poor decisions for their money that could affect them greatly long term for their retirement. I mean, it could literally take somebody years longer to retire if you, let's say, go all to cash, right? And then all of a sudden the market rebounds and it's up 20%, and by the time you put it back in, you missed a huge chunk of that
Right.
rebound. So I don't know about you, but for me that's cool, and it keeps things fresh because you get to navigate those emotions with your clients. But would you agree that now more than ever you find yourself in the position of being more of like a behavioral coach for your clients?
There's no doubt. I think what we do is we try to build trust, because if they can't trust you, it doesn't matter. We obviously have expertise, but what we're generally doing is telling them it's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. I did a video, I did a bomb video, and literally the thing was, the line on it was, it's going to be okay. So I think as an advisor, we're trying to give people advice, we're trying to give them options, but my main job is to help them not make emotional decisions when emotion shouldn't play into the decision you're making. We're not talking about choosing a spouse, right? We're not talking about choosing the color of your car, right? We're trying to talk about something that isn't tangible, and that's what's so difficult about financial planning or advising people. If you think about it, if I say, Jonathan, let's go buy a Jeep, over a pickup truck, over a sports car, we're making this decision, and at the end, you get to sit and hold it and see it.
Mm-hmm.
When I say what I think you should do is put $100 a month into this Roth IRA, because 40 years from now, it's going to provide you something that is going to be great.
And that's hard, right?
There's no tangible thing. So
it takes so
I'm trying
long
to advise behavior.
Yeah.
And behavior is a hard thing to do. So the only way to make that happen isn't about, are you cheaper than the other person? Is this investment better than this one? The only way to do that is, can I build trust so they'll take advice and make good, conscious, deliberate decisions for their future.
Yeah.
Ultimately, when somebody says to me, well, I want to do this or I want to do that, and it's totally against what needs to happen, I always say, well, it's your money. I'll do whatever you want. If you were to ask my opinion, and I've been doing this for 25 years, I don't think I'd do that. Most people then, because of the relationship we have, because of the trust we've built, will then say, well, okay, every now and then you can't change it, and
Sure.
make it happen. But once you make that decision, you just got to go forward. Like, you just make the decision, like, I'm going to pull out because such and such got elected, or so somebody invaded somebody else, or I don't like what this person said. Go ahead, pull out.
Yeah.
You think that's what I should do? No, definitely not.
Yeah.
Well, here's the best one. It's different this time. Right?
I've heard that once or twice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I'm not sure you understand.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, well, it's not necessarily any different. And I do understand. And that's why you hire us. You hire us to help you make good decisions that aren't based on emotion.
Yeah.
My wife says to me all the time that I use my psychology degree more than I use any licensing, any experience when it comes to investments, insurance, portfolio design, 100%.
Absolutely.
That's what it is.
Yeah, that's the value.
So you're working on this project, right? You were telling me about this project to say, how can we help advisors in my position to find a young person and develop that person? Like, what are the skills necessary for them to have?
Sure.
And some companies have big developed places. We won't name names because I don't want to say anything bad, but they'll say, well, here's our new agent development training. Fundamentally, we may put some different things in there, but like a new advisor, people will always say, you need to understand how to make a phone call. You need to understand products. You need to understand taxes, right? You need to understand retirement. The reality of it is what a new advisor really needs to know is they need to understand how to connect with people and build trust.
How do you talk to people? So my favorite book in the financial industry is called Story Selling by Mitch Anthony. And it's literally just about that. And he talks about the left side of the brain and the right side.
Yep.
So again, we're seeing a theme here. It's the psychology and the money kind of all wrapped in one. And the mistake that he highlights that most advisors make is that we spend way too much time talking about the data and the numbers and the performance.
Yeah.
And not nearly as much time as we should connecting with that client and building the trust and asking them what's most important to them. And in that, he says, you should picture every client that walks through your door as wearing a chain, a necklace that says, make me feel important.
Mm-hmm.
And we've all heard people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
100%.
And that's true, right? If you're sitting across from me as an advisor and you could be the smartest rocket scientist and you went to Harvard and did all these things, but I don't feel like you asked me enough questions to really get to the core of who I am, what I care about, I'm not going to have a great experience with you, and I might go to the shop down the street. So what he highlights and how we do that, and connecting it to what you're saying of like, hey, let's like wait to get to the products and the tax planning. That stuff is good. We need to know that. That's like a baseline, but let's focus on connecting with the client. Well, how do we do that? Analogies, drawing, stories. Stories are so powerful. Just being a human at the end of the day and having
finding
those real,
something that you relate.
Sure,
you relate to
those commonalities. And if you can do that, all the other stuff will come. But you need to make the client understand that you know and that you care first.
Yeah, it's one of the most interesting things is to sit in front of a young person who's trying to develop a practice and just say, why would I do business with you? And then just sit there and let them squirm a little bit in their seat, right?
That's mean.
Right, but it's hard, right? It's super hard. Whereas if somebody said that to me now, I wouldn't squirm at all. I'd be able to talk through that.
Sure.
Whereas if I was a year or 2 or 3 in the business, I'd be like, that's a really good question.
Mm-hmm.
So when we bring people in and we mentor them, it's almost like you need to be able to, let's work on how you answer that question.
Yeah.
I had a mentor a long time ago, and we were reading this book, and I can't even remember who wrote it. And one of the things he said is no advice before 10 questions, right? And then he goes on further to say no sales before 20. So the idea is that I sit down with you, and I have to at least ask you 10 questions before I start giving any sort of advice to happen. And before I sit down and say, Jonathan, I think you should open a Roth IRA or buy some term insurance, I have to ask 20 questions. And the idea was the more questions you ask, the more, and Fidelity did a study on this a long time ago, the more questions you ask, the more they believe that you have their interest in mind.
100%.
So if you just go in there and be like, oh, you're a 35-year-old single guy who lives here, who makes X amount of dollars, and here's your debt, this is what you need.
Yeah.
Part of the population will say, okay, that sounds good, that's what they need. But the vast majority of the people, when you start to understand it, be like, now that I know who you are a little bit more, you can give the exact same advice to 15 people. The people that you ask them more questions to will feel like the advice was more valuable.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like it's overlooked because it seems so simple, it seems so basic, but far too many people get tied up in looking at the numbers and the performance and the. I don't think I've ever, when I was in I don't think I ever spent time talking about beta, or PE, like maybe 1% of my time. And before a young person gets into the industry, I think. You watch a lot of movies like Boiler Room and Wolf of Wall Street, and you're like, I'm going to be that guy, right? Yeah. I'm going to be pitching, and I'm going to be. But that's old school, and that's not what people want. And they want a fiduciary. They want somebody that cares about them, and they aren't just selling product. They want somebody that, can manage their finances holistically and can manage their family finances and maybe manage the next generation. You guys do such a good job too. I think of connecting with the next generation. So you're bringing in the folks underneath that aging parent, maybe the kids, maybe the grandkids, because I know at Legacy you're trying to build legacy. And part of that is one day you will pass on your business to whoever your successor is. And a big part of being successful in that is building that trust, not just with the top family members sometimes, but the people below that to the family.
Yeah, they would often say that the success of a business owner is how the business transitions, right? So if something happens, you build the best hammer handle business, on the North Shore of Boston, and then you go to transition it to your kid or your nephew or something else, and it fails within a year. It's not your nephew's issue; it was your issue.
There were a lot of holes, right? It was like Swiss cheese,
right? Like you were making it. Like the idea is my responsibility is to organize it, so if I'm not here, the team can do what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Long term, it's going to be a little different because we're a small firm, right? Like I'm not sure that if I was gone tomorrow, would Legacy be here in 10 years? Probably not. Maybe not the way it is now. But if I'm gone for 2 weeks, will Legacy be here? 100%. It'll thrive.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's the idea.
Yeah. One of the things that sticks out with you and what you've built here is the team, the process, but also like the communication too. So on my team, we are really big at coaching using the EOS model, so entrepreneurial operating system. And what that is, it's a one-page business plan, as you know, and it outlines your mission and your core values and what your plan is. And we take a lot of advisors in the field through that exercise. Most of them have never been through that before, or back in the day, maybe they created a 10-page business plan or 20. Yeah. We know what happens with those. You look at them, and then they're so thick and big, you just end up throwing it away.
Check this out in 12 months, see if we did it.
Yeah, it collects dust. But what that one-page business plan hopefully allows you to do is to stick to that, because it's manageable and you can flip it and it's tangible and you can see it. But creating your core values and your mission, and what I've seen you do is take your mission and your values, and you guys live that, and you've communicated that to your staff, and they know it and they live it and they act it every day, so that when Mark is here, great, it's business as normal. But when Mark is gone, it's still business as normal, because that culture that has continuity. So Nicole and Jesse and the rest of the staff, they know what your core fundamentals are, and they take those into the conversations with your clients every day, so that when you go away to your trips to Africa a couple times a year, but on a serious note,
sounds a little weird, but okay.
On a serious note, they know the job that they need to do.
Sure.
And you come back and your business is going to skip a beat.
Yeah.
And in my experience, both on the coaching side and as an advisor, that's not always the case, because, and we work a lot on the succession side as well, and we talk a lot about enterprise value and a big question is what multiple is my business going to get? Guess what? If you're running a heavily owner-dependent firm, and you have all the secrets, but they're stuck up here, you're not going to get the top dollar.
No.
Because when you try to transition your business to the next generation or to your successor, there's no continuity there, because they don't know what was inside
your firm if you were gone. Right? That's basically what you're saying.
So a big part of that is to actually, it's counterintuitive, right? And there's a lot of type A very successful people who got started in this industry.
Yeah.
And it's tough for a lot of people to give up that level of control because nobody does it better than Mark or nobody does it better than Jonathan.
Right.
But you quickly realize in order to scale and to one day pass that business on, you don't want to be the smartest guy in the room anymore.
It's hard, man. Like, it's a hard thing. I think one of the things that we've tried to preach, whether we've done it well or not, we'll see, but it's progress, right? So we have this mission and this vision is, are we making progress? Are we moving forward? Are we doing a little bit better? Process. Do we have a process to make sure that the daily tasks get done so we're not reinventing the wheel every time? There's sometimes when we have to grind, and when we grind, we embrace it. Embrace the grind, because the grind won't last forever, and it makes you sharper. And then the last one is resiliency. We wouldn't be better if it wasn't for the bad things that have happened. Continue to be resilient, and the more resilient you are, the better we're going to be, the less stress, the more people we can help, the better the impact.
Yeah, it's exactly right. From a home office perspective, when we're recruiting advisors and we say, look, we're human, we're going to make mistakes.
Sure.
We're going to try not to make a lot of them, but do us a favor and judge us by two things. How do we react to it?
Yep.
And do we repeat them?
Right.
Do people get defensive or do they own it? And hopefully that's what we do is we own it and we say, look, hold us accountable. We're not going to do that again. Mm-hmm. And then do we repeat it? Because at the end of the day, we're a back office. First and foremost, we provide service, support, consulting, compliance, but most people are relying on us to make good decisions and be competent when it comes to doing things like process and paperwork. And guess what? You can't make too many mistakes when you're doing that or else people aren't going to trust you.
It's true. Trust is it, man.
Yeah.
Listen, I've loved it.
This has been fun.
We have to do it again.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous when you have absolutely no plan on what you're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Sit down and talk about it. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, I asked you before we got in here because I was going to try to, create like a mental cheat sheet and you wouldn't tell me.
No.
That's part of the fun.
I want it to be organic.
That's part of the
That's
fun.
the whole idea. Yeah.
This was cool.
Yeah. Thanks, buddy.
I love it. This was great. Hopefully you have me back sometime.
I want you to be back several times.
I'd like that. Not in January, maybe we'll do June.
Yeah, like February.
Yeah, perfect. We'll have you down in Florida.